my lovelies, welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. If this is your first time, however, just stumbling across my channel, well, I release crime content on a Wednesday and a Sunday consistently at the same time. So if you like a bit of consistency and crime, I am definitely your girl. Also, massive shout out to all my Patreon followers. You really are appreciated. And on top of that, thanks to all of you who joined me for the super chat and the lives. It really, really helps me, but also makes me feel like I've got a proper community. Kenny's Crime Cult is growing and I'm loving it. Today's case is a challenging one, mostly because it involves young killers. I think there is a part of every adult's brain that struggles to wrap their head around the fact that young people can essentially do something that is so reprehensible, that it is chilling, terrifying, and also kind of takes your breath away as it's not expected because of their age. Additionally, we're talking about girls who carried out this crime. And when we think percentage-wise about violent offenders, girls take up a minute percentage of those particular offending behaviours. So this is unusual based on that reality. We're going to be talking about the murder of Nikki Whitehead. Her real name was Jarmecca Yvonne Whitehead, but she was known as Nikki. This offence took place on the 13th of January 2010. And what makes this really challenging is that the people who killed her were her twin daughters. They were actually identical twins, Jasmiyah Whitehead and Tasmiyah Whitehead. So they were known as Jazz and Taz. But essentially, they are the individuals who carried out this killing. And when you think about the fact that that's daughters killing a mother, it is really, really unusual. So let's talk a little bit about Jarmecca Whitehead, who's better known as Nikki Whitehead. She was described by people who knew her as really loving. She was also acknowledged as an individual who sought to avoid conflict. So she wasn't somebody who was actively seeking rows or fights. She didn't like to engage in problematic behaviour or escalating behaviour, and that gives us a little bit of an insight into her character. Her start was not an easy one because she was born in prison on the 18th of April, 1975. Hardly the best place for any baby to be born, and also indicative that there were probably some wider issues within the family unit. Her mum was actually serving time for drug possession and robbery, so they're quite serious offences. And like I said, when you think about creating a baby and bringing them into this world, that is not the foundation that they should be arriving into. So because of this, she ends up being raised by her grandmother, Della Frazier. I will be honest, when Della talks about Nikki, she says that she did struggle with her behaviour. She was a child who was a little bit wild. She liked to go out partying. There was some drug use. She was very much into hanging out with people who were maybe not that good for her. And the consequence was that when she was 17 years of age, she fell pregnant. It was accidental. She certainly wasn't expecting it. More than that, she was not at 17 years of age expecting to give birth to identical twins. Because, let's be honest, having a child at any point in your life can be challenging, but at 17, when you get two of them, and you're kind of a kid yourself, that's going to be a major stressor. And on top of that, you've got the financial issues, you might not have the emotional support around you. It really is going to be hard work for a 17-year-old kid. So Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah are born in 1993. As I said, conveniently for me, they shorten their names to Jazz and Taz, which on a selfish level, makes this easier for me to remember. So as well as a complete surprise pregnancy, she then finds out that she's got a complete surprise in the fact that she's having twins. Now, initially, this kind of works out to some degree. The twins are inseparable. They did literally everything together, even finished each other's sentences. That's not uncommon. If you look at a lot of twin studies, particularly identical twins, because there is an intensity and also with identical a DNA link, understandably there is a better understanding of each other. And therefore you will see things like them developing their own languages that nobody else understands, or them finishing each other's sentences, or them experiencing pain when their identical twin is experiencing pain. There is a direct connection of empathy. It is quite unique, isn't it? The idea that there are two human beings that share the exact same DNA. Not helpful if your twin goes out and kills someone and you're not involved, because obviously you're going to have your DNA. But on a positive note, somebody who really gets you. Their father was a Jamaican national and he didn't actually have any involvement in their lives. So from the get-go, there are abandonment issues, aren't there? With children, we want to believe that we're loved and cared for equally by our parents. Even if our male parent or our female parent isn't necessarily constantly on the scene, it's the idea that we have some kind of meaning in our life. So the fact that he had no involvement will of course scars. And message out there for any parent who doesn't involve themselves in their children's lives, it's on you a lot when things go wrong, because children need security and a belief that they have value. And if you don't give them that value, guess what? They're going to get really resentful at some point in the future, or they're going to get really emotionally disturbed to some degree, meaning that they get used in relationships. What I'm saying is, it's not the best behaviour as a father or a mother to abandon your kids. Just a little bit of life advice there. Not obviously for you guys. I know you already get it. Just in case some poor parent just stumbles upon my channel. Initially, much like Nikki, her daughters lived with Nikki's grandmother, Della, because she's the kind of security and foundation in this situation. But I will be clear that in spite of the fact that Nikki had problems and issues and obviously dealt with becoming a young mum really early, she also had some really big dreams. And those dreams were all about giving her twin daughters a better life. She didn't want them to go down the same path as her. She wanted better for them, and that's testament to a good parent. It's good when our parents want us to aspire to a greater level than they did. One of the things that's noted by everybody who knew the twins is that they were really happy living with their great-grandmother Della. They really enjoyed it. They were known to be incredibly bright. They were unbelievably active. And to put this in context, because it wasn't the case for when I was at school, these girls got straight A's in school. They took dance classes, they played instruments, they were in Girl Scouts, they were honour roll students. So these are high achievers, naturally bright, naturally talented, huge hopes for their future. And one of those hopes was that both of them dreamt of going to Harvard. They were dreaming big. So Nikki's desire for her children to have these ideas and aspirations of possibility and potential, they existed. And as I said, part of that is testament to the fact that Nikki wants them to achieve where she failed, in her opinion, to achieve. It's not perfect, by the way, the relationship that Nikki has with the twins. She is transient at times. She isn't always present in her children's lives. And again, that's not me knocking her, it's a reality. And the problem is that as a parent, if you don't give consistency to your children, you give them mixed messages about their meaning. And every child is meant to lie in bed every single night, close their eyes, go into bed, knowing that they're in their safe space, in their safe place, with their safe people or person. If that isn't available to them, it causes fractures in their abilities to believe in relationships per se. And it means often that they'll hoard these resentments against individuals that they feel should be doing a better job, because otherwise they have to blame themselves. It comes down to that very clear choice. Do I believe that I'm the problem, that I'm not lovable enough, that I don't have the value for that person, and then internalize that and make it about me and my self-esteem issues then suffer? Or do I make it about their failure? And if I make it about their failure, I can be angry with them and their actions. And to some degree, actually, that's probably a healthier system to have, as long as it maintains a level of balance, because it's far better to blame the person who's actually abandoned you and isn't consistent in your life, as long as it doesn't become something that involves hate. And I think this is where we have a real problem in this particular case, because it feels like they started to have a great amount of resentment towards Nikki. And part of that will be to do with the fact that she has these huge expectations about their future, but doesn't always necessarily come up with the goods as far as committing to their relationship. So in 2000, Nikki actually meets a guy. He's 55 years old. He's a truck driver. He's called Whitehead. At this moment in time, she's working as a beautician, and she's also gone back to school to study fashion design. So it's clear that she herself has got aspirations to do better in her world. And this would symbolise and signify an opportunity as well to have a solid relationship. Note there is a big age difference there. 30 years is not a small amount of time, but I guess that Nikki was looking for somebody who had stability and security, and Whitehead did. So now Nikki and Robert have started a relationship. Obviously, she's got more of a secure base and she does want to be with her kids. So she moves into his home in Conyers, Georgia, and she takes her 7-year-old twin daughters with her. But Nikki's still really young. She's also studying. She's not in the most consistent place as a parent, and that means that she's not always available in their lives. Now, this means that their great-grandmother Della is still essentially very much involved in their world because they need that consistency and Della provides it. However, when Jazz and Taz are 13, that's in 2005, Nikki does finally apply for full custody of her two daughters. And I think we can all agree that when a court looks at a case, they're going to think about, in their belief system, what is going to be in the best interest of the children, not just now, but in the future. Della is older, she's a great grandmother. Yes, she's been an incredibly good presence in their life and testament to somebody who just shows up when they need to show up. She's a great person. But she probably didn't have the energy levels that are required to bring up two young girls. And also, Nikki has now created a scenario where she has a partner, a place, and an opportunity to fulfill the parenting role that she hasn't managed to this point. So the courts are going to look very favourably on that. And so she's successful. And Jazz and Taz move into Robert's home with their mother on a full-time basis. And this is when there's a turning point. But before we go into that turning point, let's just acknowledge that they are 13. When you are 13 and female, a lot of changes are taking place. And it's quite unique, this situation, because we're talking about identical twins. So there is an expectation, therefore, that they will be going through similar shifts. That isn't just environmentally, socially, parentally. We're talking about hormonally. We're talking about physiologically. And whilst a lot of girls will just enter adolescence without that many issues, for some girls it can be quite traumatizing, the way that their bodies change, but also the way that the hormones rage. And for some young girls, as they go through this stage, they can have levels of uncontrollable rage that are astounding, really out of control. And whilst over the years into adulthood these tend to settle, it can be a really trying time for those around them. I'm not saying that this is the case, I'm just acknowledging that this is a real pivotal moment in these girls' lives. They are 13. They're being taken from the consistent experience of being brought up by Della, their great-grandmother, and now they're expected to live both with their mother and her partner and play happy families. That isn't always the easiest shift to make. Ask anybody who's even got stepchildren how it is to bring them into their home. This is why when you're in a relationship with another person who aren't biologically related to your children, there is a much higher percentage of divorce because it can cause a few strains. You know, kids don't like being told what to do by an individual who isn't necessarily related to them. It's just the way the world works. So this is going to be a challenging time for all parties involved. And it doesn't surprise me in the slightest to hear that very quickly after the girls move in, the relationships start to sour. The girls just don't get on with their mum. It's all very well when we're a parent having these ideas about where our children are going to go and how they're going to achieve and who they're going to be. It's great. You know, I had that. My eldest was going to be a doctor. Actually, he had initially said that he wanted to work in paediatrics, and I was like, do you? Is that really a good idea? Because I think that it would be very sad if you lost a child, whereas if you were to go into cosmetics, not only would you be able to completely rebuild your mother as you go through the years, you'd also make a lot of people happy. And I did convince him to do that. But unfortunately, this is fantasy. And my son has got no interest whatsoever in being a doctor anymore. Slightly disappointed. But just bringing in the reality that our dreams are not dreams that our children often take on. And again, we've got this frustration from the young person's side. This parent has not been available to them consistently. They have probably pent up anger and rage and frustration and abandonment and attachment issues, and they are just looking at somewhere to project them. And even though Nikki has got their best interests at heart, she is probably going to be seen as their main area of discontent. And now, she's removed them from the very place that they, in their minds, feel happiest, their great-grandmothers. Around this time as well, so we're seeing a lot of changes in the girls' behaviour, it's really deteriorating in school. They're starting to act out. They've gone from sweet, innocent girls who are loved and liked by everyone, who are seen as academically very able, to twin terrors, so to speak. And one of the bugbears of the girls, which is the same for most young people, with respect, and parents, it's the rules. They don't like Nikki's strict rules. They feel like that she's trying to keep them in line, and that this is a little bit ironic because of the fact that they understand their mother's past. So it's like saying, do as I say, not as I do. None of us like that. We don't like people saying to us, you need to act this way, when we've got evidence to say that they acted a totally different way. Think about government ministers in the UK in 2020 to 2021. There's a lot of do as I say, not as I do. We don't like it, do we? No, we don't. Matt, just to say, if you're listening around the world, we've got a guy called Matt Hancock in the UK, and he, amongst a plethora of government ministers, broke their own rules. Just saying. Anyway, this is causing issues in the relationship per se, and they start arguing a great deal more, and these arguments are not your standard screaming at each other, slamming a door, maybe shouting that you hate one another, you know, those horrible things that kids and adults can do when they get into stressful situations. That's why I practice compassionate parenting. We don't shout in our household. We don't attack. We don't physically abuse in any way. It's just because of the fact that we just don't like to have those kind of stresses in our world. Everybody's different though, and I know a lot of people who do scream and shout, but when it gets to a physical level, it's a big problem. So when you're going from the escalation vocally to actually having physical aggression, we are in a danger zone. Young girls and a mother should not be getting into physical altercations, full stop. And these got so bad that Nikki and her daughters ended up having mandatory counselling, and they were in juvenile court regularly because they had these repeated police interventions. Nikki used to call the police and ask for help, basically. I think it's great that they were given mandatory counselling. I think that that says something really effective about a system. But again, the thing about counselling is you can't force it on anyone. You can send somebody to it, but unless they're willing to engage, you're not really going to get any change. Any kind of therapy really needs to be voluntary because you're not invested in it unless it's voluntary. But nonetheless, the system is trying to make a difference to these young girls and the parents' relationship. But the girls just don't really heed a lot of this, and they start really rebelling against their mother's discipline. As I said, the main bugbear for them is that they think it's really hypocritical. She'd been promiscuous as a kid, she smoked weed, she drank, and yet Nikki wanted to tell them that they needed to be well educated, they needed to be cultured, they needed to kind of go for opportunities that she never had, which again is fully understandable, but it's hard to place your perception on another human being. As my mother used to say, you can't put an old head on young shoulders. I will note, my mum still says that, she's still around, but that was her thing that she used to say to me when I was growing up. You can't put an old head on young shoulders, and you can't. My eldest son knows everything. Everything. Doesn't matter how many times I'm like, do you know what? If you do that, this is going to happen. He'll be like, yeah. And then I'll go and I'll be like, you didn't do that? And he'll be like, yeah, I did. And I'll be like, did it happen? I said, yeah, I did. Every time. I keep waiting for the epiphany where he's like, just follow mum's advice. Never happens because he knows everything. So that's what it's like when you're a kid, isn't it? But basically, the more that Nick is pushing, it creates this rebound effect to some degree. That's the way things are in behaviour a lot of times, isn't it? We push real hard, we get pushed back real hard. And we don't essentially grow because we're so busy fighting. Nikki was also really upset because she believed that the kids were sexually active. They were hanging out with older boys. This is when they're like 13, 14, and the boys are 17 and 18. So there is a big difference. There's a huge difference between a 13-year-old girl and a 17 or 18-year-old guy. They were also smoking marijuana. And it's at this point they also start to skip school. So there are some real problems in the way that the girls are acting. And understandably for Nikki, this is going to be impacting on the dreams that she has for the children that she's intending to bring up in a positive way. Also, Taz starts self-harming at this point. When you look at self-harm, people always say, oh, it's just for attention, and it is not for attention, not in the way that people are suggesting. Yes, there is a cry for attention in the fact that I need help and it should be taken massively seriously, but a lot of people just kind of dismiss self-harm. It drives me crazy because 25% of individuals who turn up at hospital with self-harm scars or self-harm problems early on within 5 years turn up because they've tried killing themselves at hospital. So it's an escalating experience, and if we don't deal with it early on, there are problems that can be resolved that fail to be resolved. So Taz is obviously struggling. You don't self-harm because you're in a good place, in a good space. You usually have low self-esteem issues. You'll usually have issues around control. Sometimes there's abuse that's occurred. There are all these things that are inviting us to understand that this is a person in pain. So Taz must have been in emotional pain at that point. Because what I don't want to do is what is really easy to do and go with the headlines. Because if I wanted clickbait, I could just put up evil twins, right? That's the way a lot of people can describe them. I've seen it in the press. Evil twins. Like these two girls who carried out this murder were just bad through and through. Like, with respect, somebody who's self-harming tends to have levels of empathy. They tend to have levels of compassion, but they don't necessarily have a lot of value for themselves or others because they genuinely don't feel good about the world around them or the way that they feel within that world. So it's high level when somebody starts abusing themselves, and it's an insight into a very unhappy mind. Now, on one occasion, Nikki even discovers where this behaviour is unravelling, that Taz has missed several days of school, and she's actually been staying with her 19-year-old boyfriend. So that is going to make you enraged. I would have been enraged as a parent because I'm being lied to, my kid's missing out on important areas of their education, and essentially it means that I don't have a level of control that I feel as a parent I require. So it also compromises and challenges me as a parent and the skills that I have within being that parent. So Nikki drives to the house where this boyfriend and Taz are, and she drags Taz out physically. She then confiscates her phone, which is going to cause ruptions, isn't it? And on the journey back, they're actually arguing, and this is how high level this issue was. The argument got to such a place that Taz threw herself out of a moving car. And I'm bringing that in because when an argument gets to a point where an individual is willing to put themselves in risk of mortal danger by throwing themselves from a car to deal with the avoidance of that situation, we know that argument was out of control. You can't argue with yourself. And it's very easy to always paint victims and perpetrators as one black, one white, one good, one bad. It isn't realistic. The truth is that we all make mistakes in relationships. There's never any excuse to kill anybody ever. But the point is that we can always look at our behaviour and try to modify it so that we don't carry on this consistent theme of patterns in our relationships that are destructive. It should never get to a point where a kid in a car feels that it is better to throw themselves out of that car and risk their lives than to stay and confront the issue. That requires a change in the way that those conversations and arguments occur. There is nothing constructive about that, right? So Taz is obviously in a mindset where she's reacting in the extreme. And of course, this could also give us insight again into some issues that she's having with hormones or the way that she interprets threats, because this is a really acute reaction. Most of us would never do that, no matter how harrowing the argument was. It doesn't make sense, does it? But it did to her in that moment. So again, that insight into impulse control and regulation. Now, on another occasion, in June 2008, police officers are called to the home again. Nikki's been on to 911, and this officer attends the house to see what's going on. Nikki even says, when the officer arrives, very openly, that the girls have attacked her, that she's not attacked the girls, that she's not really fought back. She's basically just barricaded herself in a room for her own protection and called the police. And the officer said that even though she walked in, to all intents and purposes, to a place that was very homely, the girls had lots of lovely items. She makes note of that they had a wardrobe full of lovely clothes and they looked immaculate. The officer just felt that there was something untoward about the presence of the girls and the way that they seemed to be acting, that they looked very innocent, but that she felt that they had some pretty big potential. And she also felt that the way that the girls communicated was almost a setup against their mother, because obviously it's 2 against 1. So when you've got Nikki saying, my girls have just attacked me, and you've got the 2 kids saying, well, actually that didn't happen, then it's hard to navigate that, isn't it? It's also worth recognising that the officer said that she looked at the girls and they had no scars on them, they had no scratches on them, no bites on them, no marks to indicate that they'd been in a particular fight, whereas Nikki did seem dishevelled and as if she had been in an altercation. So again, I think that the officer judged in that circumstance that it was Nikki who was at risk. And she felt so perturbed by this that she waited around the area. She actually sat outside for a good few minutes, and it was only 2 to 3 minutes later that this situation starts to unravel once again. And that's because as soon as Nikki goes back into the house, the girls are on her. So basically, the minute that she walked through that front door, after she'd dealt with the police officer, Taz had come into her bedroom, locked the door, and started to hit her. And then Jazz had actually knocked on the door, telling Nikki that she was going to help her. And that means that Nikki opens the door, and then Jazz starts attacking her too. So at this point, she's got both of the girls on her, both aggressing her and violently attacking her, and she's literally hysterical. She's got scratches all over her body. The police officer returns to the scene and says, wow, there is something really worrying about this, because these girls are unnervingly calm and they are claiming that Nikki had attacked them and that they defended themselves. But like I said, no marks on the body, and the story is not believed by the officers. The officer is time served and she can sniff out that this isn't a true story. And because of this, they end up taking the girls into custody and they're both charged. When the juvenile court judge hears the case, they describe the girls as ungovernable. I mean, it's quite a statement, isn't it? You're basically ungovernable. No one can govern you. We should probably just put you in a field and leave you. You know what I mean? Like, of course they're governable. It just means they need to be governed in a different way. But you can see where that juvenile judge is going. They're saying basically these kids are completely out of control. And I will tell you that Nikki actually expressed to people that she knew that she felt afraid that the girls may be possessed by a demon. I get that. I get that so many parents would want to disassociate their children's behaviour from the child that they actually are, because it means that they can love that child in spite of their behaviour. If you can say, oh, this is all down to some kind of demonic possession, then your kids are innocent and you can love them. Whereas if you start believing that, no, this is actually my child and they are really violent and abusive and threatening and dangerous, then that in itself is something that makes it more challenging for you to firstly have a relationship with your kids over, and secondly to feel safe. And that's the big thing here, isn't it? Because if she's saying, I think my kids are possessed by a demon, we're getting again some insight into just how violent these children must have been behind closed doors. Because to be possessed by a demon, we've all seen the films, and she will have too. They are uncontrollable, aren't they, in those films where they're possessed? They are dangerous, they are damaging, they are violent, they are abusive, they hiss, they spit, they scream, they threaten, they break things. So I would imagine that Nikki's description is trying to encapsulate that kind of behaviour. The court obviously want to try to sort this out. They can see that it's getting out of hand at home, so to avoid the further conflict, the court basically say that the girls can return to their great-grandmother's care, which the girls are really happy about. Now, I don't know how I feel about this. On one level, it's paramount that Nikki is safe, of course. On another level, when the court intervenes in these kind of situations, the issue that you've got is that on one level, you undermine the parent. The parent that you're trying to protect, who wants them at home, now has lost the case for them being at home. For them, that means that their authority has been challenged, which thus means that to some degree, when they try to exert authority again, it doesn't have the same leverage it would have. But additionalise this, the girls have been reinforced. The girls have recognised that the behaviour that is completely reprehensible has now led to a situation where they've got what they wanted. So as opposed to it causing the girls concern, it's actually reinforced that this kind of anger, aggression and behaviour gets them what they want. And that is not a good lesson to teach any young person. I will say the judge again ordered Nikki and her daughters to attend family counselling, which is great. But they go back to Della, their great-grandmother, and they're having a great time, aren't they? She can't control them. She's older. And the girls don't change their behaviour at all. They continue to be really difficult. And essentially, it's recognised that they get to run wild there. And even though Della is an awesome human being, understandably, she's older. How can you manage two aggressive young people, particularly two young people who've been reinforced that they can get away with what they want anyway? So Della even has to bolt her bedroom door at night because they start stealing from her. So we have to note that for Della, she's probably as scared of the twins as their mother has been. By 2010, school have a lot of issues with the girls. They're repeatedly truanting from school, they're running away from home, and you will not be surprised to know they end up back in juvenile court. By this time, Della's 81 years old. She's 81 years old, bringing up two young adolescents, and rightfully so. She tells the judge that she's really struggling to control the twins. She's obviously become afraid of them to some degree, she's worried about her possessions, and she's probably bloody exhausted, and completely understandably, she's spent her life bringing up other people's children, so to speak. Nikki steps in at this point, and she says, look, we've had our problems in the past, but I really want my daughters with me. I think Nikki's really brave. I don't necessarily think it's the right decision to make, because I think that she's been put in situations before where she's experienced some pretty high level abuse from her daughters. But she obviously has this enduring belief that if she gets them home at some point, they'll come through the bad times and they'll be able to live together happily as a family. The twins are really incensed by this. They are protesting acutely at court, saying that they do not want to go back with their mother. But in spite of this, the courts say that they're going to be sent home for a 2-week trial period. This flip-flopping concerns me because, again, the girls have previously been taught a very important and damaging lesson, which is if they act out really acutely, the court will agree to send them back to their great-grandmothers. That's not a good lesson for anybody to learn. And it kicks off royally. So this is a juvenile court. These are two young people who are not happy, and they do not care about authority. Again, important insight. They kick off at court. People who witnessed the girls in court said it was one of the most chaotic scenes that they'd ever seen, because the girls have learned that the more that they resist, the more likely they are to get what they want, which is to return home with great-grandma Della. And I wonder what the court individuals working there were thinking at that moment in time, because clearly these kids are not happy going home with their mother. Now, it's also worth bringing in the fact that previously, Jazz had actually told Nikki that if she ever had to live with her again, she'd kill her. In spite of that, Nikki wanted her home. So on the 5th of January 2010, they very reluctantly, very unhappily, moved back into their mother's and Robert's home. Nikki's really excited though. She genuinely wants them to enjoy living with her, and she even throws them a homecoming party. It does not go well. Party ends up in shouting match. There's a massive confrontation between the twins and their aunt. So we start automatically getting back into that situation and cycle where this is a hostile environment with potentially dangerous outcomes for Nikki. And the same pattern begins as before. You know, the mother and daughters clash daily. And in the 1 week that follows, Nikki calls the police 3 times to report her kids. She says that they're out of control. Within 1 week of them going home. Again, I think that this is giving us some really important insight that the courts have allowed the girls to go home with Nikki, and yet she herself is saying that it isn't working out pretty much from the get-go. Because I don't think that these girls should ever have been returned home. I don't necessarily believe that they should have gone back to their great-grandmothers either. But this is a toxic situation that isn't healing, it isn't getting any better, it's just escalating into a more dangerous territory. And remember, these girls have already violently attacked their mothers. They do not want to be there. It doesn't matter how much coaxing, how many parties, how many people say that they should be there. These are girls who are voting with their feet. And on the 13th of January 2010, police are near Nikki's home. Basically, they're serving a warrant in an unrelated case in the neighbourhood, and they're passing by Robert and Nikki's house when all of a sudden they see Jas appearing, screaming, waving, and basically flagging them down. And when the girls have managed to flag the officers down, Taz and Jas are screaming that they've come home from school and they found their mother dead in the bath. Police obviously attend the scene immediately, and one of the things that they said is when they walked into the home, they could smell the coppery smell of blood. So they instantly knew that somebody was either really badly injured or even worse. The police discover Nikki's body, and her body's been placed in a water-filled bathtub, And clearly you can imagine when somebody is bleeding out that that bath is just going to be blood soaked. She's been brutally murdered. It's obvious from the get-go. It's clear she's been beaten around the head. It's also clear that she's been stabbed multiple times. It turns out that she's been stabbed 50 times. And the attack has been so severe, so violent, so brutal that her spinal cord has nearly been severed. Think about that. That's a really brutal attack, isn't it? Also, she's got loads of deep wounds that have penetrated both lungs and even the jugular vein. She was 34, a really young woman, whole life ahead of her. The police also note there are lots of bloodstains on the carpet, on the walls. There are drag marks between the living room and the bathroom. One of the things that they pick up pretty much from the get-go, because obviously the police are used to these kind of scenes, is they can't find any evidence of a forced entry and they can't note anything that looks like there is a sexual assault that's occurred. Remember, when we think about these kind of home invasions and violent, brutal killings, we tend to look for those issues because we're thinking this is somebody who's a random stranger and probably somebody who's a lust killer, but they can automatically see that this isn't the case in this situation. The medical examiner who looks at the body, they conclude it looks like it's a crime of passion. They felt that the wounds themselves must have been committed by someone who knew the victim. So they're drawing in to that intimate circle of individuals that Nikki must have known. It's really sad because in spite of the fact that Nikki had these really catastrophic injuries, of course she did, if she'd been treated immediately, they said that she would have actually survived her injuries. So that demonstrates, doesn't it, how devastating it would be for the family. The fact that Nikki was very badly injured, but if someone had called an ambulance or discovered her, chances are she'd have been okay. The officers who find the girls in that situation say they're absolutely distraught, completely unable to speak, they're just sobbing, they're beside themselves, they're not considered suspects because they look at those girls and they see authenticity. Genuinely, the police automatically want to comfort them. These are two kids. They've just found the mother in the most heinous of situations. All they give them is complete sympathy, empathy, and compassion. The girls are brought in together because they're not suspects. So the police want to treat them as respectfully as possible. And they start speaking to the girls and they're kind of asking them, would anybody be out there who might want to harm your mum? And the girls kind of implicate Nikki's partner, Robert. The reason for this is because they claim the mother's been seeing another guy called Joe. And during a conversation where Nikki's on the phone to Joe, Robert hears them talking on the phone and then confronts her about it. The police investigate this, but they can't find this mystery Joe. They can't find him. He doesn't seem to exist. DNA tests later will also conclude that Robert wasn't the killer. So they're able to discount him. In fact, his phone and GPS records support that he was elsewhere. They also look at the girl's father, but he's instantly ruled out as a suspect because he's living in Canada with his family. The girls are then taken to the local police station, and it's during this journey that an officer notices that Taz seems to be biting her arm, which is going to cause concern. I guess as well, the officer's going to want to make sure that she's safe whilst in their custody. So they question her on it. And she says, it's just something I do when I'm upset or nervous. And actually, this is true. You know what? In self-harm, we see this where people bite themselves, scratch themselves, harm themselves in moments of stress. It's a soothing capacity. It means that they can release certain chemicals in their brain that calms them. Yes, for most of us, the idea of inflicting pain upon us would not bring calm, but it's just the feedback that happens from the brain to individuals who do take part in harm behaviours. Often it's a soothing exercise. I imagine the officer will have come across this before, and I also imagine that will have settled the officer's mindset around why she's doing it. All the officers want to do is to console the girls. These girls have been through a massive trauma, and so they ask them, is there anything that we can get you? And this is when one of the detectives investigating the case said something just felt off. Because in that moment, when the girls who've just witnessed the most traumatic experience, lost a mother, and are dealing with the ramifications of this, when they are asked what they would want, they asked whether they could watch CSI. That's right. In my moment of great trauma over the loss of my mother and the brutal slaying of her, my first desire is to Watch crime scene investigation. If that isn't the most linear experience, I don't know what is. The police are like, that's weird. That's weird. And this is when they say that alarm bells are started to ring. Also, it's been noted that the girls wore gloves on their journey to the police station. And then they go into the police station and they keep them on. Now, I agree, it might have been a bit chilly. Maybe those little fingers were cold and they needed to keep them warm. But the minute that you get into a police station, you're going to take them off, aren't you? But they didn't. So this, again, is another red flag to the officers. And they say, can you just take off your gloves? And lo and behold, you'll be surprised to know that they've got scratches and bite marks all over their hands. At this moment, they instantly agree that the reason that they have these injuries is because they had a fight earlier on with each other. Convenience. I think the police at this point are thinking, we have you banged to rights. We don't know how we're going to get you yet. We haven't got any kind of confession. We don't know how we're going to get you to confess, but we know that this is looking uncannily suspect. And suspicions grow further towards the girls when there are inconsistencies in the stories. So the night before Nikki was murdered, they claim that she'd had an argument on the phone with her boyfriend, another boyfriend to Robert. They said she'd been massively intoxicated, so intoxicated in fact that they needed to help her to bed. They then claim on the day of the killing, they'd knocked on their mother's bedroom door and they hadn't got a response. So they walked to school, 7:30 a.m, and they arrived around 10 minutes late for class. And this just surprises me still, because how is it that still in 2021, people don't realise, whatever age they are, particularly young people who are very computer savvy and tech savvy, how do people not realise that like CCTV is everywhere? Like you can't go anywhere without somebody following you on CCTV. Literally, you've either got your neighbours filming you, or you've got the local constabulary filming you, or you've got private car parks filming you, or you've got shops filming you, schools filming you. You're just filmed all the time, literally. One day, they'll be able to show your whole life in CCTV from birth to death. That's how much you filmed. And yet, for whatever reason, people are like, I'll just murder somebody and I'll just go somewhere at a different time to when I say I've been somewhere, and they'll never know. Of course, they will know. So the police get the surveillance footage from the school to see when they arrived in. And lo and behold, it appears that they weren't there very early on. They arrived much later in the morning. In fact, it turns out that the girls have left for school quite a lot later than they should have. They even hitched a ride from a petrol station around 10:15 a.m. So we now have evidence on CCTV that their story isn't adding up. Also, this left a 2 to 3 hour unexplained time gap in the girls' version of events. The police then start to point these inconsistencies out, and you'll be surprised to know their response to that is that the girls become really angry and uncooperative. We know that their behaviour is that way when they're put in challenging circumstances. It isn't surprising that at a point of conflict, they return to those coping strategies. The police need to get them apart. It's really important that they separate the girls. They want to establish if their version of events are consistent, essentially. One of the things that is also standing out during this experience is, bear in mind, they have just lost their mother. And you'll see from the interrogation footage and from the interview footage that it is clear that they are trying to play the scenario to their favour. But when it's not working out for them, you see the attitudes start to rise. And one of the things that is missing within this is their real sadness about what's happened to their mum. There is some acting at the beginning of their interviews, but very much you kind of pick up early on that they're not that concerned about what's happened to the mother. They do appear to cry a lot, but there don't actually appear to be tears. Something about that, isn't there? When people are like crying and you're looking at them and they're very dramatic, but there's just a dry face. It's quite disconcerting, if not a little bit scary.
Oh, my grandma. Oh, my mama.
You walked in and what happened?
I went to the kitchen and put myself down. And I seen the blood all in there on the floor. And I went in there and I seen her and I touched her.
Let me see your hands and your arms. What happened here?
I got into a fight.
Did you get in a fight with her?
Right now we gotta be strong so they can catch the person who did.
Did y'all leave the house this morning?
We missed the bus, so we had to walk.
You walked all the way to Rockdale?
It's not far.
You think we did it? I don't think y'all did nothing. Why you say that?
It seemed like it.
Who said that?
Well, it just seemed like how y'all was questioning us and stuff. It seemed like y'all think we did it.
They're actually really critical about Nikki as well. So from the get-go, you would imagine that they'd be devastated. Even if they weren't happy in the relationship with their mother, it's still their mother and she's just been found in a horrible situation, dead. You wouldn't automatically start criticising her, would you? You'd still be in the shock phase, the, oh my God, I've not got a parent, I love her, and so on and so forth. Even if that dissipates over time, in that initial experience, it would be shock and horror and pain and fear. But they just start criticising her. They're insulting about her. And that's at the same time as the investigation going on at the home. So the police are seeing this really disturbing behaviour, whilst in tandem, there is a crime scene that's being explored and it is building up a very strong forensic case against the girls. So as much as they're trying to get away with murder, it seems that they haven't done a very good job at the crime scene. Because one, the investigators find bloody clothes in the washing machine that belong to the girls. In Taz's room, police find these brown boots, they're covered in blood, in a shoebox, and stuffed inside one of the boots, they also find this clump of hair that appears to have been torn from the scalp and then wrapped in a napkin and stored there. It also appears that someone's attempted to use bleach to clean blood on the carpet. They can smell that when they go in, and also the discoloration is very clear. And even though at this moment in time, the police only have circumstantial evidence against the girls, it's still enough to make them feel that they've got the right people. Both the girls are released at this point because they haven't got enough to charge them whilst they are building the case. So the girls get placed under the care of Division of Family and Children's Services. And for the next 4 months, they do live separately, but they seem to just get on with their lives as normal. And to put that into context, you know, they've just lost the mother. There's this police investigation going on around them, and they just go out socialising with their friends, they go to parties, they even attend their prom. Even when they're at their mother's funeral, they go with the boyfriends, and they're just seen laughing and giggling. It just doesn't fit with mourning children. Nikki's brother, so their uncle, even confronts them about this and basically said, what did you do to my sister? He ends up getting escorted from his own sister's funeral. Not his greatest day, but I totally get it. I totally get why you do that. It's probably one of the few opportunities he's going to get to confront those girls, and he obviously can see that the likelihood is that they have murdered his own sister. The police are diligently investigating this case, and a breakthrough occurs when forensic examinations find a hair lodged in Nikki's teeth because it seemed as though Nikki might have bitten her attacker. She didn't go down without a fight. It's very clear from her injuries that she had defence wounds and that she'd fought hard for her life. Police who took the girls in that day remember that one of them was biting their arm. So they were personally biting their own arm, and suddenly they make the connection. Was this girl trying to disguise the bite left by her mother? Fortunately as well, police have been bright enough to take photos of the bite wounds on both of the girls previously. So now they've got examples of the bite marks that were on the girls' arms, and the bites proved to be a match with Nikki's teeth imprints. So a forensic dentist basically says, to a reasonable degree of probability, the bite on Jasmiyah Whitehead's left arm was placed there by her mother. This is when Taz and Jazz are arrested and charged with the mother's murder and aggravated assault on 21st of May 2010. One of them's arrested at home, the other's arrested as they come out of school. So the police have them in custody. And as you would imagine, initially they completely deny the allegation. However, whilst awaiting trial, Taz changes a plea because an attorney manages to get a plea deal. When you think about what they were looking at, they might have been in prison for the rest of their lives without any kind of option of freedom, whereas with a plea deal, you're given a better option to potentially see the light of day outside again at some point in the future. Taz doesn't agree to plead guilty to murder. She agrees to plead guilty to a lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. And as part of that plea deal, she also agrees to tell police what happened on the day of the killing. It seems the girls had stayed out really late the night before. They got home around 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And the major incident that occurred for them to get into the altercation with their mother is that they didn't want to get out of bed. Basically, they'd been out late, they didn't want to go to school, and Nikki walked in and said, you need to go to school. And rightly so. That's exactly what Nikki should have done. Nikki was completely in the right. Your kids should be going to school. They're not in control of your home. You are in control of your home. So basically the girls were too tired. They didn't want to get out of bed. Nikki wants them to go to school, and this is where the fight erupts. And it's purely because they're running late and they've missed the school bus. But remember, the history of these girls, they have learned and had reinforced that when they act out, they get their own way. So that's their learnt behaviour at this point. And Nikki is completely innocent. All she wants to do is get them to school. Yes, she hasn't been a perfect parent, and yes, there have been inconsistencies in the way that she's brought the girls up. But that's it. That's the beginning, middle, and end of her parenting mistakes. Certainly, she does not, by any stretch, deserve any kind of violent assault per se, let alone being murdered by her own girls. Now, the girls claim, and they both claim this, that their mother basically threatened them with a kitchen pot. She waved it around, she tried to hit them, and this is what started the escalation. They reacted, in their words, very angrily. I think we can say to the least you reacted angrily. I think you reacted out of control and murderously, but okay, we'll go with you reacted angrily. They start fighting, and at this point, one of them gets a knife, and Nikki gets slashed with a knife. I can't imagine where her mind would be in this moment. You never believe that your children have the potential to kill you. Even if their behaviour is reprehensible at times and violent, you think that they have boundaries. It's one of the big mistakes that we make in domestic abuse situations. We believe that the perpetrator who's harming us would never harm us that badly, and then they kill you. That's why domestic homicide happens, because people don't believe the person that's living with them and beating them could really do anything that bad. They can. They do, regularly. Now, at some point, they say the fight stopped because Nikki gets out of the house. And this is really, really sad, because it does seem to be the case. The evidence that the police found was that Nikki had managed to get next door. Nikki started screaming and made it to her neighbour's home, begging for help. Now, the neighbour does recall hearing his bell ring and also remembers that there's frantic knocking, yelling outside, but because it's in the early morning, he's in bed and he ignores it. I don't get it. I don't get it. If I heard screaming, knocking, and yelling outside at my door, I wouldn't be like, oh God, if this was 9 a.m, I'd be totally there. But this is like only 7:15, so I'm just gonna stay in bed and ignore it. I know they're not responsible for this, but come on guys, is there nothing we have learned from Kitty Genovese, the bystander effect? You know, the reality is, if you hear somebody screaming who sounds like they're in danger and is asking for help, freaking get some help. Call emergency services. You don't even need to get out of bed to do that. Is it just me? I get really frustrated by those kind of lazy behaviours. Again, not blaming the neighbour, just saying we can do better than that, can't we? In a good society, we take care of our community. And the police find blood on the neighbour's wall, which corroborates this version of events. So Nikki at this point is desperately trying to get help. Now, according to the girls, Nikki then goes back into the house and lunges at them with a knife, at which point she's stabbed to death in the fight that followed. Come on. None of us believe that. I don't need to be there to think that Nikki was like, oh, I'm screaming for help, probably lay on a step, mortally wounded potentially, terrified of my own daughters, so what I'll do is I'll just get a knife and I'll go back in and fight to the death. That is not Nikki's behaviour. We know it's not Nikki's behaviour because we've seen her in previous altercations. When she's in a circumstance where she feels at threat or in danger, she calls the police and barricades herself in her bedroom. She is not going to change that pattern of behaviour because she knows where these things can end. So we can't believe the girls at this point. This is them trying to build a defence for themselves. This is them saying it's manslaughter, not murder. They were defending themselves. They weren't just attacking in a premeditated fashion. In reality, as far as we're concerned, the girls dragged their mother back into the house and then they started to resume the attack. It's as simple as that. That fits this scenario way better than the girls who are just quietly waiting in their home at a point of escalation and degree that we've arrived at and they just let mum go. Not a chance. Jazz then says that Nikki comes back into the house of her own volition, apparently, you know, armed with a knife. And so she strikes her over the head with a large vase, and then she chokes her with a ribbon from a medal that she won. So again, this doesn't sound like two girls who were ever going to let this woman walk away. Nikki fights back. She really does. She's defensive, you know. She bites, she scratches, she hits the girls, until, of course, Taz stabs her in the stomach. And Taz stabs her in the stomach multiple times with a steak knife. They then drag Nikki to the bathroom, and when they're asked what their mother is saying to them, they basically say that their mother is saying that she hates them and that they go to jail. Again, I would excuse Nikki in this moment in time where she's being murdered if she actually said that. I don't believe it though. I really don't. Because Nikki's behaviour up until this point hasn't shown hate. It's shown tolerance. Yes, they've got into rows that ideally they shouldn't have, but she's committed to things like counselling, and she clearly wanted the picture perfect family that she couldn't achieve, but that she dreamt of. They then put Nikki in the bath, and just to add to this little bit of dialogue that's apparently come out of Nikki's mouth where she's saying that she hates the girls, she's also now asking them to kill her, or she will kill both of them. I wasn't there. I'm just saying, it's not really what people say. Just kill me or I'll kill you when you're in a bath about to be drowned or stabbed or murdered horribly because they have the upper hand. There's two of them and you're in a bath of water. Just saying, it doesn't stand up, does it, when you start analysing it behaviourally? She goes under the water a couple of times, according to them, and then she dies. They minimise that, don't they? That's what they talk about. They say that she went under the water a couple of times and then she dies. But that doesn't tend to be the way things play out in these circumstances. Drowning is not a quiet, simple experience. You know, people fight, and it's not the natural inclination of a human being to just willingly go under a couple of times and just die. There isn't peace in that way. It's not a nice situation when somebody does drown. She then talks about how the girls both cried a great deal. They cried a lot, apparently, and then they both changed their clothes, clean up the scene as best as they can. They're not forensics, so they don't know how to do this efficiently. It's a much bigger job because there's blood everywhere. And then they actually go to school because the reality is they want an alibi. This is their watertight, can't go wrong alibi. Even though they suggest that this was a non-premeditated moment, when the investigators explore the background, they do come up with some pretty disturbing pieces of information, one of which is the girls have been planning to kill the mother for quite a long time. They find a journal, both girls have written in it, and it's a journal that describes how much they hate the mother and how much they want to get her out of the way. Again, a lot of young people write journals, not necessarily together, but they are twins and they're identical, so we can let them have that. But a lot of young people write horrible things in journals about people. I definitely did when I was a young person. It doesn't mean that I've got a form or ambition to do anything desperately horrible to people. It just means that I'm cathartically expressing the way that I feel, and I get rid of those feelings by writing them. If I read them 10 years down the line, I'd be like horrified by some of the things that I wrote, even about wanting to hurt myself, because you're being dramatic. I don't think that's enough to suggest that they were definitely premeditating this murder, but it does give us an insight into the fact that they were desperately unhappy and they didn't want to be with her. Also, that trigger that they talk about is something they stand by. They absolutely both agree that the main reason they killed their mother was because she got them up in the morning, and that was the tipping point. Asking them to go to school when they were knackered just was a push too far, which is breathtakingly terrifying. Because if you think about the innocence of that, it's just such a normal thing for a parent to ask their child, you're meant to be at school, go to school. I don't expect you to smack me around the head with a pot, stab me multiple times, and drown me in a bath at any point. It's as simple as that. But nonetheless, this was their tipping point, and that's what started that brutal attack on her. In January 2013, Taz pleads guilty to 3 charges. She pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter, falsification in a government matter, and possession of a knife in commission of a crime. She gets sentenced to 30 years in prison. The following month, Jazz pleads guilty to the same charges and receives the same sentence. Identical charges, identical sentence for identical twins. The judge probably felt that that was something that they had to do. Could have really messed with them, couldn't they? Could have been like, 12 years to you, 45 years to you for no other reason than to mess with the minds. But apparently that isn't how the judiciary works. It only works a little bit like that in my head. Now, we're going to be honest. There was lots of tension in that family, wasn't there? It was a complicated family involving Nikki, her grandmother Della, and her mother, Linda Whitehead. When you think about the background of this crime, the fact that Nikki was born in prison to Linda, who didn't bring her up. And Nikki's absent mother, Linda, would actually later down the line even accuse Della, the girl's great-grandmother, of teaching them to disobey their mother. I mean, I just think that's a bit of a stretch. I do understand family tensions and resentments. I'm sure that Linda has issues with her mum, Della, but nonetheless, Della showed up. She might not have been perfect, who is, but she showed up when those girls needed her. So I think it's really important to think about the fact that Linda probably had some high-level resentment towards Della and therefore wanted to paint Della as the problem, not Linda as the problem. Now, even though I think that Linda is exaggerating her claims around Della, I also do think that we've got to make it clear that prosecutors did suggest that there was animosity between Della and Nikki, and that animosity did lead to conflict with the twins. It's hard, isn't it, in relationships? When we have a great relationship with one person and then another person comes into our lives who we care for, but maybe there's conflict between the person that we really love, we tend to want to take sides. And in this case, it seems like the girls wanted to take Della's sides. And you look at their behaviour and the turmoil and the kind of cascading into problematic territory, it does begin when the grandmother traded custody of them. And whilst this isn't about blaming anybody for the actions and reactions of these girls, we do have to note that the girls did become increasingly unruly as their mother and grandmother traded custody of them. So when they didn't feel that they had control in their environment, when they didn't feel happy in their environment, when they felt that they were disposable, being traded between different people, it escalated negative behaviours. That is something we would expect to see. It's hard growing up as a teenager anyway, let alone finding that your lived experience becomes so inconsistent. We want to believe that we have security, and when we don't, it causes a whole heap of issues. Now, this case has been on parricide. Parricide is very rare. We estimate that children killing a parent is only between 1% and 4% of murders. And cases of matricide, so killing a mother, that is approximately only 1% of murders. So it's tiny. And in the majority of cases, the perpetrator is going to be an adult. So it's not even a child who carries it out. Not in this case, of course, we're looking at 2 adolescents. And also in parricide and matricide, you expect to see overkill. That definitely played out here. So overkill is when you carry out a crime and you go above and beyond what is required to kill the person. In this case, she was stabbed 50 times. And the reason that they believe that this kind of crime is a crime of passion is because it involves the release of these very strong negative emotions, that it's almost like you have to have had some kind of resentment and relationship breakdown with this individual to want to hurt them so badly. And that attack to Nikki falls in line with what you would expect in matricide, which is the attack carried on until the girls had managed to spend all of that rage. In matricide, it's also common that there is a history of abuse, but there isn't in this case. So there hasn't been any sexual or physical abuse as far as we're aware. But weirdly, it seems that in this case, we could almost turn it on its head, because it seems that the kids became the abusers. And that abuse became more and more violent until it escalated to a point which ended in tragedy. Now, even though both of those girls are in prison, and they're in prison for 30 years, they both became eligible for parole in 2017. They haven't been released yet, but nonetheless, they have become eligible. And although the girls have been inseparable, they have been made to serve their sentences in different prisons. I think that must be very painful for them. Identical twins obviously have these incredibly close connected relationships, some would say fused, and to suddenly find yourself separate from the person that you spent most of your life with and who you love deeply, that is going to be very problematic. But again, I suppose that the courts feel that firstly they are serving a sentence, they are being punished, therefore they deserve to be punished, and being together would not be seen as the same kind of punishment or level of punishment that other prisoners deal with. But also, I would imagine for their own sense of self and development, they feel that it's better for them to be separate so that they could have individual experiences as autonomous human beings, which often is something that requires that kind of separation. Taz is incarcerated at Pulaski State Prison and Jazz is at Arundel State Prison. It's also worth noting that Jazz has done really, really well at Arundel State Prison. She actually was valedictorian, so the top of her class, in her class when she graduated, albeit in prison. And her great-grandmother Della was there to watch her. So she still has a lot of support in her life, and I'm sure her sister does as well. But it does demonstrate that given the right circumstances and the right support, it is absolutely possible for even individuals who carry out crimes as reprehensible and terrifying as these, particularly when we're talking about a crime that involved the murder of a mother, it can still result in rehabilitation. So I do understand why parole is considered important for these girls, because there is a strong possibility that they will correct their ways and they could indeed go on to live lives where they do something positive for the community around them. That is something that we see time and time again. And like I said, this is one of those cases that's really emotive. We want to believe that young people who kill must have something broken within them. They must be evil, they must be born that way. And on occasion, I think they probably are. There are certain individuals who I think we can undoubtedly agree have a streak in them that is probably super dangerous, and they probably should never walk the streets on this planet ever again. But I don't think it's the case for these girls. I do think with the right amount of reparation, restoration, understanding, therapy, education and opportunity, it is possible that they could go on to live better lives. But again, that's something that you might not agree with. Some people think that they need to stay in prison for the rest of their lives and rot away. Personally, I think that the developing brain is one of those areas that we're getting to know more and more about. I also think we have to recognise that there were two of them involved, and therefore if they'd just been individuals, this might never have happened. And most importantly, we have to have some sympathy and empathy about some of the dysfunction they experienced when they were growing up. That does not mean in any way, shape or form the victim is to blame for what happened. Nikki Whitehead was an innocent woman who deserved to be living her life happily, healthily and in love with Robert for the rest of her life. It's as simple as that. No excuses. I'm just bringing it into the context and understanding that these are two young people who do seem to be making great strides in bettering themselves whilst in prison. Let's see whether that happens. They might get out at separate times. They might never get out at all. Only time will tell. I hope you found this case interesting. It's horrible to imagine, isn't it, that we could be living with our own murderers, and those murderers are those babes that we gave life to and that we brought up and that we adored and that genuinely we thought would want to protect us more than anything. Is it just me who does that with the kids? I'm like, kids, I've had you so that you look after me forever. You know what I mean? I've done the hard work. I've paid a lot of bills. I've sorted you out and bought you a lot of presents and given you nice Christmases. But the minute I start dribbling and need attention, I want to be in your spare room. Is it just me who's done that? I've almost convinced them as well that they want that. Mum, when I'm older, I'm going to build a house and I'm going to build you a house on the same plot. Oh, my subliminal processing has worked. Bring your girlfriends home, move them in with us. Don't leave, it'll be good for you, beneficial to your economy. I'm doing it for you, not me. I'm doing it for me, it's always for me. Hopefully the kids won't watch this one. If you do watch this, I'm lying. It's just a joke. It's just high jinks with my lovely, lovely supporters on YouTube. Let me know what you think about this. If you haven't got notifications on to let you know that I'm releasing content, pop them on, subscribe, give us a like, give us a comment. It all helps. Thanks for your support. Love seeing you guys here, and I'll see you next time for True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. See how I said that then? It's like an announcement. Emma Kenny. Just me. Just me. As normal. Next time. See you then.